Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world. And so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing incredibly well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much. And wherever you are, go and spoil yourself because you deserve some spoiling. Go and get yourself a lovely drink or something because we're on part 3 of our story tonight. And it's a fabulous story because strange things are happening in the Kramer household. But could they be attributed to the paranormal? Or could something more rational be going on? Well, we're about to find out now. But before we do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And at this moment, Mrs. Kramer is on a bus and she's sitting next to a young boy who's in her son's class at school, who's got a bit of a fixation on her. In that quintessential moment, I decided to have a conversation with Mrs. Kramer. I couldn't believe I was so close to the woman. I could even touch her if I wanted to. I'd admired her from afar for so long, but now I was determined to become more bold and assertive, which is not like me at all. But I knew that this was my perfect moment to take the bull by the horns and strike up a congenial conversation with this beautiful, beautiful woman, or I might never get another chance. I said to her very casually, "You're Mrs. Kramer, aren't you?" She looked up at me in surprise from her cell phone, and her perfect green eyes met mine. And goodness gracious, every single cell in my body was doing a happy jiggle, and the breath was expunged from my lungs, because I could hardly believe that I was actually having a conversation with this beautiful, beautiful woman. Such were the powerfully intoxicating effects that this woman had on me. I could feel the butterflies flapping around in my belly, as I was completely mesmerized by her. When Mrs. Kramer answered my question, she had the voice of an angel. I never knew how important voices were until now. But when my mother talks, she sounds like a croaky bullfrog. I think it's because she smokes so many cigarettes, and over the years it's made her hoarse. But Mrs. Kramer's voice, well, it was as soft as peaches, but very elegant at the very same time, just like the woman. Everything about this woman was as graceful as a ballerina. "Yes, I am Mrs. Kramer. How do you know?" she asked me. "Do I know you from somewhere?" she asked. "No, you don't," I said as casually as I could, although let me tell you, I was terrified that this beautiful, beautiful woman would hear my heart thundering in my chest, because it was drumming so loudly in my ears I could hardly hear myself think. As such was my excitement to be in this extraordinary woman's company. Some people might be overwhelmed by meeting their favourite celebrity, or someone in the royal family perhaps of great significance, but such people would never impress me, not for a moment, not like Mrs. Kramer did, for this woman was holding my very heart in her hands, let me tell you. "I just saw you at the swimming gala recently," I told her. "I realized you were Robert's mother. I'm in his year at school, you see," I explained. "Oh, so you're in my son's year, is that right?" "That's right," I said. Mrs. Kramer smiled. Oh, goodness gracious, that smile of hers made my heart melt like chocolate on a warm saucepan. "It's such a small world, is it not? Who'd have thought I'd be sitting on a bus next to someone who's in Robert's year at school? I don't normally take the bus, you know, but I'm stranded today. My brakes have been giving me so many problems of late, so I'm having the issue checked out. So my car is having a full service, even as I speak. You can't be too careful with cars, can you?" "No, you can't be too careful," I agreed. "You have to make sure that the car that you're driving is at least safe. I drive a beat-up old thing myself. It belonged to my father. It is forever breaking down, but it's a reliable chunk of metal, and it's never, ever let me down yet." "Well, I'm very glad to hear that. As far as I'm concerned, a car is a car at the end of the day. As long as everything is in working order and it gets you from A to B in one piece, that's all that matters. If you want to know the truth, I'm far too tight to get a taxi," she admitted. I don't believe in throwing money around willy-nilly. Must have something to do with my upbringing, perhaps. And buses these days are so cheap. Besides, I rather enjoy taking a bus. It's nostalgic for me, rather reminding me of my school days. And I loved my school days. I've got many stories about my little journeys in the yellow school bus growing up that used to drop me off on the corner of our street. So tell me, how well do you know my son? I'm very good friends with your son, Robert. I lied, kicking myself for not being entirely honest about that, and pushing the truth well over its boundaries, for I was not exactly a friend of Robert's. But I figured out that Mrs. Kramer would like me all the more if I was good buddies with her son. So it didn't do any harm to stretch the truth a little bit. Maybe I should make an effort to befriend Robert a little more, I thought. It would certainly help me to get closer to Mrs. Kramer. And what would be bad about that? Well, I must admit, said Mrs. Kramer, studying me with a keen interest, I did think your face was rather familiar. So I must have seen you hanging around with Robert before. So you remember me? I asked hopefully. Maybe she hadn't forgotten how our eyes had met at the swimming gala. Well, not exactly, she said rather gingerly. But I definitely have seen your face before, because I never forget a face. And your face is very memorable, I might say. Little did Mrs. Kramer know that her purse was facing me. Its mouth was gaping wide open, as she had left the zipper wide open, probably when she was paying for her bus ticket earlier on. I could see a chunky bunch of keys staring at me, like an old friend that needed to be nudged. And so I instinctively knocked over my cell phone, so it fell at Mrs. Kramer's feet. She bent down to retrieve it for me, and while she did this, I sneakily slipped the keys out of her purse and put them into my pocket. I'm genuinely surprised they didn't jingle at all, but I was so slight with my hands that I don't think for a single second Mrs. Kramer suspected a thing. She handed me my cell phone, looking extremely apologetic. Oh, I do hope it's not broken, she said. I hope I didn't bump you. I rather think I might have knocked your cell phone out of your hands. It just fell to the floor so quickly, didn't it? My heart melted when I listened to Mrs. Kramer's voice. What the hell was wrong with me? Why was I completely bedazzled by this woman who was old enough to be my own mother, who had cast me under her spell completely? I'd have married her blindfolded just for that voice of hers. I studied my cell phone and looked at her with a warm smile on my face. No worries, Mrs. Kramer. My cell phone is in healthy working order. I, of course, pretended to check it out, but I wouldn't have cared a jot if it was broken. I was sitting next to the most beautiful, beautiful woman in the entire world. I couldn't have been more happy. Oh, what a relief! I'm so glad it's not damaged. I would have replaced it, of course. Where does No Worries come from, if you don't mind my asking you? You're not Australian, are you, by any chance? I do seem to remember No Worries is an Australian term that is regularly used in that part of the world. You're not wrong. It is used in Australia. We have a guy in our year. He's from Sydney, I explained. His name's Mark Tacker. A very nice guy he is, too. When he first started at our school, we couldn't understand his accent, but some of his sayings tended to stick. They've been very catchy, if you know what I mean. So practically everyone in our year says No Worries now. I can't say that I've ever heard my son Robert using such terminology, but I know what you mean. It is very catchy. I might actually use it myself from time to time. Now, Mark Tacker, that's a name I remember. I know him. My son brought him around to the house for a meal once. And you're right. I do recall him saying No Worries a lot of the time. At this point, the bus came to a grinding stop, spraying out smoke fumes and heaving sighs on the road, as buses so often do. Mrs. Kramer rose to her feet, adjusting the purse strap over her shoulders and zipping up its gaping opening. "It's so lovely meeting you," she said, her beautiful green eyes focusing all on me. "Goodness gracious me, I can't believe how rude I've been. I must apologize. I haven't even bothered to ask you your name. If I were to get home and tell my son Robert I met one of his school friends on the bus, he would say, 'Who is it that you met?' And imagine how foolish I would sound if I said, 'Sorry, but I don't know.' I'd never hear the end of it from my son." "The name's Michael Falconer," I said, wondering, of course, whether I should have told her my full name, because I was sure that Robert would confirm that I was definitely not one of his good friends after all. But I was hoping to change that, although it would be a challenge to find anything in common with someone as sarky as Robert Kramer. Still, I would try my level best to befriend him. I remained on the bus when Mrs. Kramer got off. I didn't want to look very creepy by following her off the same bus at the very same bus stop. I knew I'd hit pay dirt, of course, when I discovered I had the big bunch of keys to Mrs. Kramer's house that probably opened all the doors, and that was when I decided to set up home in her attic, so I could watch her and feel close to her. I don't know where I thought of this idea from, but when it came to me in a tornado of thoughts, it seemed like the most fabulous idea. I knew Mrs. Kramer had an attic in her home. She lived in an old house, and I'd seen the attic window at the very top of her house, and like many families, I doubt she ever used it, so it would be the perfect place to watch over the woman, who was intoxicating all my senses, like the most provocative perfume you've ever smelt in your entire life. I remember when the Kramer family went away for a weekend. I took my chances. I clandestinely let myself into Mrs. Kramer's house, which thankfully was not alarmed. It was there that I very carefully set up hidden cameras in every room in the house, with the exception, of course, of all the bathrooms and toilets. It wouldn't be right to watch the woman undress. Some people might think I was a pervert, but I was in love, and that's very different. It was not a love that was blemished or soiled by the filth of inappropriate teenage fantasies. My infatuation was much more spiritual, like a soul connection, you could say. I wanted to keep an eye on Mrs. Kramer, as that useless husband of hers was always out of town. He should have been watching over his wife, but no, he had bigger fish to fry, it would seem. At that time in my life, I was living in 2 residences. Sometimes I was hiding out in the Kramer's attic. Other times I was at home with my family. I was 16 when this happened. My father worked in the security business, and I'd helped him on many occasions install hidden cameras into people's homes, so it wasn't a biggie for me to have to put up cameras in the Kramer household. By all accounts, cameras can be so tiny. Sometimes you don't even know they're there. And indeed, that is the whole point of them. With a bunch of keys to the Kramer household, I'd been coming and going exactly as I pleased. Luckily for me, Mrs. Kramer didn't bother to get the locks changed when she discovered her keys had gone missing. For me, going into her house meant I felt closer to her than ever before. And that was like having all my dreams come true at once. I could clandestinely watch this beautiful, beautiful woman from the computer installed in the attic. But I did have boundaries. I would not watch Mrs. Kramer getting dressed or going to the toilet. That would be vulgar and intrinsically wrong, and would make me a pervert, and I had no intention of going there. I may be many things, and I knew hiding out in her attic was wrong, but a pervert I definitely was not. Indeed, I had a very dim view of people who spied on women for sexual gratification, for that in my book was smutty and inappropriate, although you could argue that what I was doing at the time, hiding out in the Kramer's attic, was extremely inappropriate, and of course you wouldn't be wrong about that. But Mrs. Kramer had become like a drug to me. Being close to her, even if she was oblivious of my presence, gave me my next fix, and if you've ever experienced drugs before, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. even though I spent a great deal of time cooped up in Mrs. Kramer's attic, rather like a bird in a very dusty cage. I also spent some time at home. Ostensibly, my insouciant, very aloof parents didn't notice me coming and going, because my father was very distracted at the time, for he was surreptitiously having an affair with a woman he was fixated about, and he pretty much had the same kind of tunnel vision over this woman that I was having over Mrs. Kramer. Maybe we were two peas in a pod like that. My father would disappear into the yard shed at all hours when he was at home, making all kinds of ridiculous excuses to my mother about something he needed to get in the shed. My father spent a lot of time restoring old furniture as a pastime, so his trips to the shed raised no suspicions on my mother's part. But I wasn't stupid. I wasn't born yesterday. I knew something was up. My father's body language was furtive, as if he was up to no good. So I had discreetly followed him. That's exactly what I did. I wanted to know what he was getting up to, because unlike my very ignorant mother, I smelt a rat, and this one was a hell of a stinky. When I stood on one side of the garden shed, where I was not visible, I overheard my father having a conversation with his fancy woman on the phone. I was later to learn that my father met this mistress of his on a job when he installed hidden cameras in her home, so she could spy on her husband when he wasn't around, for she secretly suspected her husband was having an affair behind her back, and was secretly inviting women over to the house while she was out working. The hidden cameras confirmed her worst fears, that her husband was indeed cheating on her. But it seemed, rather than confronting her husband about his infidelity, she thought two could play at that game, and she herself began to have an affair with my father. So yes, my dad was doing the dirty behind my mother's back with this woman. I don't blame him, of course, for cheating on my mother, for if I was wearing my father's boots, I'd likely do exactly the same. And this is coming from someone that does not approve of infidelity of any kind, and emphatically believes it's morally wrong. But you must understand, my mother is a stroppy old cow, and I don't say that lightly. I often wonder to myself whatever induced my father to marry the likes of her. But old photographs confirm that she didn't always look like a female prison guard that wanted to punch you across the face if you stepped out of line. I have to remind myself that without my mother, I'd never have been born. So I suppose she does have a few redeeming qualities, but not many. Put it this way, I certainly wouldn't want to be married to my mother. My mother's name is Amanda, and growing up she tirelessly complained about everything and nothing. So hanging around her was like standing under a dark cloud every day of your life, and wondering when the thunder was going to strike. From as long as I can remember, my mother was always telling me what a bitter disappointment I was to her, and that I would never ever amount to anything, just like my father. My mother relentlessly told me over and over again that I was cut from exactly the same cloth as my father, which showed that she didn't have any respect for my father either. It didn't matter that at the time I got straight A's in school, until they slipped to C's after I began to become obsessed with Mrs. Kramer. My mother always saw me as a good-for-nothing loser, even though I did my best to be a good student and a great son to her, but it was never enough. And I think a huge part of me longed for a mother that would appreciate me and validate me, like Mrs. Kramer clearly did her own children. To tell you the truth, I was indifferent about my father's affair, and had very little sympathy towards my mother. I don't think at the time she knew my dad was doing the dirty on her. She could be incredibly naive and very unobservant like that. I will admit, as a curious 16-year-old, I occasionally eavesdropped on my father's conversations in that yard shed that he was having with his lover. I couldn't help myself in that regard. I was inquisitive by nature. I've always been rather nosy. I was to find that my father was always telling this lover of his how much he loved her, and how they would be together soon, once he got to divorce my mother, of course. The truth is, I knew my father would never ever dare divorce my mother. My mother would likely blow a gasket if my dad dared to leave her, and I mean that quite literally. If my mother had known my father had done the dirty on her at the time, she'd have killed him. I'm in no doubt about that. She always reminded me of that part Kathy Bates used to play in Misery, as not only does my mother look like a doppelganger of the part that woman played, but of course she's like that in personality. And as you can imagine, a woman like that is not the kind of woman you would willingly upset. You could say I'm from a bit of a dysfunctional family, and you would be right about that, which is maybe why I turned out the way I did. Some would say it's not normal for a 16-year-old boy to have a crush on a much older woman like I did. At the time, I couldn't help the way I felt about Chantel Kramer. There was something about that woman that made me feel intrinsically alive. I really believed I was genuinely in love with her. There was nothing dirty, filthy, or obscene about this fixation. Love is very different, for it is not tainted by lust. For feelings towards Chantel Kramer on my part were pure, unadulterated, and not polluted by dirty fancies. Growing up, both my parents lived in a very old house opposite the woods, not much different to the beautiful old house the Kramers actually lived in. Only the Kramers' house was in great condition, for a 300-year-old property, and ours was not. Our house looked like it was forsaken and neglected, as if it badly needed a makeover. My parents could easily have afforded to fix the place up, but my mother was not at all house-proud, and my father was too caught up in his affair with his fancy woman to concern himself with any handyman jobs around the place that were begging for his attention. I would regularly take the public walking trail through the woods to get to the Kramer residence, and it was a perfect shortcut, and only took about 20 minutes. And then I would be there, and it would be behind a dense curtain of trees, with a good pair of binoculars, where I would hide behind a tree and easily watch the comings and goings of the Kramer household. I could always tell if Mrs. Kramer was out. She'd leave the garage door wide open, and her car would be missing, and I would know it was safe to go into her house, knowing very well that I would not be seen. I suppose I did start to treat the Kramer household like a home from home. Sometimes I'd help myself liberally to stuff out of the refrigerator to satisfy my burgeoning teenage appetite, and then there were times I would buy stuff from the local store. I'd buy things that would please Mrs. Kramer, such as New York cheesecake, which was a firm favourite of hers, and pecan nut pie. She'd always seemed surprised by these additions to her refrigerator, which she believed had been left there by her husband. But she didn't realise that husband of hers didn't do any of these nice things for her. It was me all along. When I was in the house and nobody was around, I would wander around liberally, even watch some television, have a snack perhaps, until I heard a familiar car rolling up the driveway, and then in that moment I would hurry upstairs, pulling down the ladder that leads to the attic. It was dark and dingy in the attic, of course, but I had made it as comfortable as possible for myself, with a sleeping bag and a soft downy pillow. Sometimes it became extremely frustrating, being cooped up in the attic, like Anne Frank, with all those dusty boxes containing all kinds of bric-a-brac that had no earthly use whatsoever. But I happily found a photograph album of pictures from Mrs. Kramer in one of those boxes when she was a young girl, and I'd taken them home with me to put on the inside of my closet, so that when I'm at home, I would be able to feel close to the woman. I really believe Mrs. Kramer was quite literally the most beautiful, beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my entire life, and if being close to her meant living in the Kramer attic, then so be it as far as I was concerned. I often had to walk up and down the attic at night to relieve my stiff joints, because it got really cramped up there and extremely uncomfortable, so I didn't sleep easily. I had heard Ella Kramer, Chantel Kramer's teenage daughter, saying that there was a ghost in the attic, but Mrs. Kramer thought they had a rat problem. She kept saying that that redundant husband of hers, Russell, would get some traps set up in the attic, but I would laugh about that, because I knew that that was never going to happen. For Russell Kramer was predictable. That's one thing I would say about him. He was bone idle, and when he returned home he would drink beer liberally, watching television to his heart's content, telling his wife he needed to relax because he'd been so busy on the road. He rather reminded me of a walrus on the beach, all whiskers and blubber, waddling to the refrigerator every few minutes to down yet another beer. I remember thinking to myself that Mrs. Kramer deserved so much better than him, for he never bought her flowers or ever took her to dinner, and when he returned home he pretty much had nothing to say for himself about where he'd been or what he'd done. And when Mrs. Kramer praised him for bringing her New York cheesecake that I had put in the refrigerator for her, she thanked him for it. "Thank you, sweetheart. What a thoughtful thing for you to do. I do so love New York cheesecake." Mr. Kramer would snort and nod, taking credit for my kindness, and would say, "Only the best for you, love." I guess I grew bolder being up in the attic, and then the night came when things nearly came to a head, because Mrs. Kramer saw me for a brief second. I know she did. I had watched her up in the attic eating all that delicious Chinese takeout in the lounge, and it looked so very good, so tempting, and there was so much left over that she had packed away in the refrigerator, and I was incredibly hungry. I was absolutely famished, for I'd eaten nothing all day, and there was no food in the attic to satisfy me, and I knew if I ate some of the takeout that Mrs. Kramer had ordered, she'd be unlikely to notice. She always buys a ton of food for her teenagers, for she complained tirelessly that Robert and Ella could quite literally eat her out of house and home. So when I pilfered stuff to eat for myself out of the refrigerator, Mrs. Kramer didn't notice at all. I assumed she falsely believed all the extra food had gone down her teenagers' hungry gullets. I was very glad that Mrs. Kramer had the house to herself that evening, for it meant I could feel so much closer to her, without her annoying teenagers flapping around so wildly. That night felt pretty special for me, let me tell you, as it would only be the two of us, and Big Boy, of course. I'd grown very fond of Big Boy the Great Dane, and when I was alone in the house with him, we had become firm friends. He knew that when no one was around in the house, I would come out to play with him, so the dog was immensely grateful never to be left alone. Out of Mrs. Kramer's two teenagers, I have to admit that Robert annoyed me the most, even though I was trying at the time to become his good friend at school. But one thing that bugged me the most about him is he would listen to the most god-awful loud music. It was so awful, the music he liked. It gave me the most horrendous headaches, even when I was up in the attic. So him not being around that night was blissful as far as I was concerned, and an added bonus, for the house was so much more serene. Mrs. Kramer had run for herself a hot bath. She was humming to herself, and I can't blame her for that, for Robert wasn't around, and the house was so peaceful. And even when she hummed, her voice was beautiful. I just couldn't get enough of Mrs. Kramer's voice. I didn't watch Mrs. Kramer undress, because I'm not that weird, nor am I perverse. I definitely respect people's privacy, especially someone like Mrs. Kramer, who is a beautiful princess in my book, that deserved to be respected and treated like a perfect lady, something her husband failed to do. Anyway, while she was humming to herself in the bath, and knocking back a huge bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, that I knew her husband Russell would not be pleased about at all, as he preferred it when his wife didn't drink, which was so hypocritical on his part, because the amount of beer that man consumed when he was at home was ludicrously insane. Why he begrudged his wife an occasional glass of wine, God only knows. After all, don't they say what is good for the goose is good for the gander? It was at this opportune moment I slipped off to the kitchen and hurriedly sneaked some Chinese takeout from the refrigerator. I put it on a plate in the microwave to warm up. It was delicious. On this occasion I actually ate my food at the kitchen counter, as I knew that Chantelle enjoyed indulging herself in long hot baths, especially when her children weren't around. so I could take my time and enjoy my food. As I was returning to my hiding place in the attic, I decided to take a quick peek at Mrs. Kramer, because I could hear her humming to herself in the bath. I wanted to just take a glance at her beautiful face, and I knew she'd be decent, because she'd be covered by the water of the scented bath stuff that always turned it into a pink cloudy colour, almost as if she was bathing in strawberry milkshake. She was lying in the bath, her eyes tightly closed, and the bathroom smelt sensational. I couldn't resist tiptoeing into the bathroom and writing on the bathroom mirror in that moment. I wrote the words high. Why I did that, God only knows. I didn't want to draw attention to my presence in the house, but I just wanted to communicate with Mrs. Kramer in some small way, and kind of tell her that I was watching over her, even if that loser husband of hers failed to do so. When I squiggled high on the bathroom mirror, Chantelle's eyes were closed, but Big Boy the Great Dane rose to his feet to greet me, his tail thumping enthusiastically. He was certainly pleased to see me around. I didn't want to draw attention to myself, so I whispered to Big Boy, encouraging him to follow me to the kitchen. Thank goodness he was not one of those dogs that frantically barks and draws a great deal of attention to himself. But I suspect he's become rather acquainted with me, as when Mrs. Kramer is out shopping, he sees me as a member of the family, because I walk around the house at will, doing my own thing. So I guess he sees me as the friend that lives in the attic. He followed me out of the bathroom that evening, and I led him into the kitchen and gave him some dog biscuits, closing the door behind him. I then tiptoed back into the bathroom to look in on Chantelle again. I was certain that she wouldn't see me, but I wanted a brief look at her, not in a perverted way, of course. But when she opened her eyes, I was pretty sure she saw me. But thank God she didn't scream. I think she seriously doubted what she was seeing. That's why she closed her eyes again. She had drunk almost a whole bottle of wine, of course, so she might have believed she was hallucinating. I sincerely hoped that that would be the case. Nervously, I hurried back to the attic to take refuge and sanctuary. I inspected the camera on my computer screen, and later I could see Mrs. Kramer surreptitiously going from room to room, holding up a cast-iron poker in her hand. She appeared freaked out. She had seen me, but I imagine in the mist of the bathroom I had probably looked ambiguously obscure, so very vague, so much so that I have to thank God for small mercies. The next thing I knew, the police were at the house. I began to sizably panic. I was terrified that they would look into the attic and find me there, but it never occurred to them to do just that, which was a huge relief. They searched the house from top to bottom, and then reassured Mrs. Kramer that no one had broken into her house, as the windows and doors were perfectly secure. But I could see Mrs. Kramer didn't look remotely happy. She seemed affrighted, a little on edge. I felt really bad for scaring her half to death in the way that I did. I shouldn't have taken my chances by sneaking a peek at her in the bath. The officers told her to call someone around to the house to be company for her, so she called her best friend Fee. I could tell Fee thought that Mrs. Kramer must have drunk way too much and was seeing things that were not really there, and that suited me just fine, because that's exactly what I wanted Mrs. Kramer to believe. It was 3 o'clock in the morning when the house had become very quiet, and that was when I surreptitiously crept down the steps of the attic's ladder. I usually always did this in the early hours of the morning, while everybody in the house was fast asleep. I've always been a bit of an insomniac, you see, so I tend to like wandering around at night. I decided to look in on Mrs. Kramer, forgetting, of course, that she was sharing a bed with her friend Fee, who had come around the house to help her feel less insecure about being home alone. I always liked to look on Mrs. Kramer at the dead of night, when everybody was asleep, because I would get quite restless being up there in the attic, and I liked to look in on Mrs. Kramer. It made me feel close to the woman. No one ever saw me on these nightly soirees, Even when Russell was at home, he drank so much beer. I doubt even the sleeping dead would have awoken him. He was so slothful. Even when he was at home, he appeared to be no threat. If he had been a male lion in Africa, overseeing a pack of female lionesses, let me tell you his days as a lion king would have been seriously numbered, for he'd have never been able to protect his entire family, as he was always half-cut at night, and too bone-idle to lift a damn finger around the house. I stood in the doorway of Mrs. Kramer's bedroom, while the dark shadows in the bedroom shrouded my presence. But a blue glow from the night-light in the passage cast an ethereal illumination over me. Big Boy noticed me, of course, as he always did, and trotted over to greet me. That was when I noticed Mrs. Kramer's friend Fee, that I'd forgotten had been sharing a bed with her that night. She was moving around restlessly in the bed. I imagine it's not comfortable to sleep in somebody else's bed. But very suddenly she sat up. It was tenebrific in the bedroom, let me tell you. But I know she saw me standing there, staring at her wide-eyed. Some moonlight washed through a crack in the curtain. I imagine it may have lit up my face a little, coupled with the bluish glow from the landing light, which would have been pretty spooky, let me tell you. And maybe it did make me look like a ghost. I made a swift dash to the attic, my heart racing in my chest. I was terrified I was going to get caught. The woman had seen me. That was really, really bad, I thought. I was grateful to discover that Fee thought she'd seen a ghost, and initially I was amused by this, until while I was in the attic tuning into my computer in the early hours of the morning, and I listened into Fee and Mrs. Kramer discussing what had happened that night. I could see that Fee had successfully persuaded Mrs. Kramer to call a psychic medium around to the house at once. She insisted that ghosts and ghoulies were causing trouble in Mrs. Kramer's home, and they needed sorting out, rather like an infestation of rodents. So there we are. That is the end of part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night, and I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye, good night.